In this video, I would like to talk about the true enemy, which is the Archons. Funny enough, if you take the word Archon and you break it down phonetically within the English language, you get a compound word, our cons, because it is based in deception. And if you fall for their deception, then you take these cons and you consider them to be your own, which they're not. Hence, the Archons are our cons. And if you break the word down etymologically, it goes back to the Greek archon, which means ruler. Therefore, if you take the phonetics in the English language into consideration in conjunction with its etymological root, you get this: the cons that rule over us. So, if you want to be without archons, and you are therefore anti-archon, then by definition you are an anarchist, because the word anarchy literally means to be without rulers or to be without archons. But what the agents of chaos, which are the archons, have done is they make you think that without the agents of chaos, there will be chaos, which is actually an oxymoron. You see, it is the archons, or the rulers, that are actually the ones that are creating all of the chaos and suffering and falsehood and enslavement in this world, but they make you think that without them, you will have pure chaos. Hence, if you don't like them, then you're an anarchist. But what we ought to do is embrace the term anarchy and consider ourselves anarchist, because in so doing, you are actually anti-chaos insofar as you are anti-archon. You see how that works? So in definitional closing, archons are the cons that are ours which rule over us. Therefore, if we want to be without archons, then we must become an anarchist, and then that way the slave drivers with their falsehoods will no longer from that moment forward be able to rule over us. And then we're able to see the archons as something that is external, like a virus that has infected the majority of humanity, while we ourselves are immune from the virus because we've already built antibodies, so to speak, because we were once infected with the virus, but now we have healed and it's never going to return again. We are immune to it. They are no longer our cons, but they are the cons of others, and we see them truly. The agenthood of matrixship is the governmental, because the word governmental, if you break it down, is govern, meaning to control, and mental, which refers to the mind. Therefore, the governmental is mind control. And who are in these positions of governmental authority? The archons slash rulers, because what position guarantees the maximum amount of rulership? In fact, the guarantee thereof, it is being in a position of the governmental. So, therefore, we must dehumanize these psychopaths by not referring to them as a person, but as a homogeneous archonness, where you didn't get pulled over by a police officer, you got pulled over by an archon. If there's a specific politician or politicians that you hate, don't call them by name, refer to them as a archon. That's what I mean by homogeneous archonness, because that is the very dehumanization that these psychopaths deserve. Because when you are a archon, of course, you, by definition, are going to be in a position of rulership. And all of those positions of those various, quote, humans that are occupying them are, by definition, archons. So, with that being said, the Archons, or rulers, are those in all positions of government, whether in a senior rank, like a politician, or in a junior rank, like a tax collector or a police officer. But the way I see it, all of them are anonymous as a person, and they are at the rank of an Archon and nothing else. All agents of the state are Archons, semi-human entities who uphold the system, work for the system, and are extensions of the system. This includes so-called teachers, who are really teachers of the lie or employees of a brainwashing facility, who are but mouthpieces of governmental curriculum, which is nothing more than the regurgitation of a script. Because they are the boots on the ground of childhood institutionalization and have complete rulership over subjects, Archons is what they are. But as a disclaimer, this is not to say that if you happen to be a teacher, that you are necessarily contaminating minds of the young. Reading, writing, arithmetic are important. You only become an Archon as soon as you teach agenda-driven propaganda. If it happens to be a part of the curriculum, this sometimes is unavoidable, or if you speak your own political opinion aloud to them, as both right-wing and left-wing narratives are state-approved. You could say all teachers are in a archonic position, but yet not all teachers are Archons. But I would wager to say a good portion of them are, if not most of them. This depends on the curriculum that they teach and the personality involved. You know, if you were to ask any parent if they would feel comfortable letting complete strangers babysit their kids, the answer would be emphatically no. Yet, this is exactly what compulsory indoctrination camps called schools are, being forced to give your kids to blue-haired, nose-ringed, woke weirdos to be babysat by the state. And again, why are they called Archons, according to me? Because they are system workers and system upholders in a position of rulership. This makes them so. School is a cooperation training ground. Like a dog, you are told to sit, then stand, and then to sit back down again and get back up again all day long, all according to a bell, where obedience is rewarded and disobedience is punished. But if we bring up the idea of being forced against your will to be stuck in a room all day, a hostage situation comes to mind, except this does not apply to children. Many a whore of a teacher I had to suffer with back in my day. I would complain to my parents, complain to the principal. They told me to, quote, be a better student. But when I would get written up for no good reason, they would sure take the teacher's side, even though that bitch had it out from me. Many of these women had mental illness and were downright abusive and had noxious personalities, but when you are a teacher, you are a boss. And it taught me at an early age that you could be a terrible person as long as you were in a position of authority with no repercussions. A lot of teachers, in my recollection, were straight up Archons, who would go on anti-white and feministic tirades if in a good mood, or chew your ass out for some stupid reason at random if in a bad mood. Permanent PMS syndrome is what I called it. You know, all around the campfire, you hear about the problems of ableism, sexism, racism, homophobia, etc. But it is actually children who are the ones treated like second-class citizens and thus mistreated the most. And nobody even bats an eye. The word to describe this phenomena is called adultism, which is the power imbalance and systematic prejudice that adults have over children and youth. It manifests itself as the assumption that young people are inferior to adults because of their age, leading to the dismissal of their ideas, rights, and autonomy. Think about it. Corporal punishment is legal in America. which is rationalize mild violence upon the physically weakest kind of human. But if a husband was to do the same thing to his wife, this would be called domestic violence or battery. But if it is administered to offspring, it is then called parenting, and though controversial, is still commonplace and not a crime. Kids are often also forced to be silent and sit still. And because this is unnatural and in many instances impossible, they are then pathologized as having ADHD and made to take toxic psychotropics against their will, not even being aware of what they are consenting to or what they are not consenting to, then guilt tripped to feel that there is something morally wrong with them, even though silence and stillness is biologically far from normal in respect to their nature. To illustrate these double standards, look at it in this wise. If a party was to force another party to conform to an arbitrary or even a detrimental end, that dynamic would be described as a toxic relationship. But if the same is done to minors, it is called cultural upbringing or subjective parenting preferences. They are considered wards of the state and parental units. A ward is another word for slave. They have zero ownership of their physical bodies. In this archonic demiurgic regime, it is the minors who are oppressed the most. It is not just teachers who are archons, but perhaps parents, so too, even more so. There is no prohibition in place to stop the worst kinds of people from breeding, and once they do so, a child will have to suffer physical and emotional abuse from a narcissistic archon, and compulsory belief system conformity from their household rulers. When it comes to a man and a woman who are planning on conceiving a child, the main question you should be asking yourself prior is not, do I want to bring a child into the world, but rather, do I want to bring a slave into the world whereby I will be his master or her master? Because that's really what it is, folks. That's why parents speak upon their children as if it's their property. Because even though it's an extension of their ego and they want to program it to be just like them, whether good or bad, um, they also consider it to be an extension of themselves. Hence, it is my child. Don't tell me how to raise my child. The child belongs to me. So the child is basically property. Now, when you have a human that is literally your property, then by definition it is a slave, because a definition of slave is a claim of ownership upon the body, i.e., property. So, and of course, you have good slave masters and you have bad slave masters. But ultimately, when you bring a child into the world, you are bringing a slave into the world that you consider to be your own, and it is ultimately the property of the parental units, or even more so, property of the state first and foremost. So, what is a dictator? A dictator is one who dictates a subject insofar as what is right and what is wrong. Now, with that being said, parents are also dictators because they micromanage and dictate every single aspect about how that child is raised. They chomp at the bit and froth at the mouth because as soon as a child is born, they want to program it like a robot to be exactly in the way they want it to be. Like a god, they say, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. After all, you are the creator, and that is your creation. biologically speaking. So you want to thus make him or her in your image. And then immediately, as soon as it's old enough to understand language, you're putting all of this political and religious gobbledygook in their mind. And because their brain is like a perfect computer, born a blank slate with no ability to question the data that goes into it, you're programming the child exactly how it's going to be when it grows up, and it's going to be just like you. Because children are not only slaves at the mercy of their master, but children are also little programmable robots. And parents love that sort of thing. That's why I say they froth at the mouth and chomp at the bit. And they can't wait for it to form concepts and be able to understand and speak language, because as soon as that opportunity arises, they're going to, with an act of their will, program the software of that brain to be exactly a spitting image of themselves. To assume the claim of ownership upon a body is slavery by definition, and that's precisely what children are. You can use whatever kind of euphemistic language you like. You could say, I am not a master, I have conservatorship, and that is not my slave, that is my ward. But really, if we're not mincing words, it's identical. It might not be legal to purchase slaves, but it is perfectly legal to breed them. Hence, a lot of parents have children and they have them do all of the chores in the house, all of the chores outside, with no payment. But they're not a house slave. That's just them, quote, earning their keep, right? But the way I see it, there is great importance in stressing the issue of non-archontic parenting, because by definition, you are in a archonic position because you have full rulership over the child. The word archon means ruler. But if you allow the child to have freedom of thought, freedom of movement, freedom of expression, then you are allowing the child to assume sovereignty. And in that case, the child is not a slave and you are not an archon. But the vast majority of parents do not do this. They ideologically enslave them through socially engineering them, first and foremost. All of the bullshit mind control that they were subjugated to when they were kids, they basically do the exact same thing. And that is very catastrophic. Also, unfortunately, it's not against the law to be a fucking asshole. And if you are an asshole to your child, um, you're an archon. I'm sorry. And because it's not against the law to be an asshole to your kid at all times, that is why I am mostly against the idea of bringing children into the world. Because when you bring a child into the world, you have effectively put him or her at the mercy of the masters who are going to assume slavery ship over them. So, in the same way, you have good masters and you have bad masters. All I would do is, if you have a child, to just be a quote, good master. And even though they are technically slaves, don't treat them as such. The most evil thing in existence is existence itself. And this is made possible by the archonic activity of the sex act. And therefore, there is nothing more evil in my mind than Homo sapien impregnation. Because now you brought a central nervous system into the world, which is the true root of all evil, because it makes the evil of existence possible, and it makes the apprehension of pain possible. That's right, folks. The most evil thing in existence is existence itself. And the root of all evil is the central nervous system. But none of it is possible without the archonic activity of the sex act. And yes, it is archonic because it is the relationship between me, the ruler, and you, the ruled. Now, we've talked about the archonic dynamic of adultism, which is supremacy of the parents over the children, or in a societal sense, adulthood subjugating the youth in general. But there's actually a reversal of this power dynamic that is just as destructive, and that is called juvenocracy, which is basically where children usurp the authority over the adults. Now, here's the thing, because will to power manifests itself absolutely in this plane of existence, if there are not certain boundaries that are limiting the young, this is actually going to become dangerous for their safety and overall well being. So you have to discipline or set limitations for minors, but within reason, I would say. Because we all know that particular household where the parents are actually subjugated by their own children, where they're spoiled little brats, and whenever they don't get what they want, they throw a temper tantrum, or they'll verbally abuse the parents and say, fuck you, mom, fuck you, dad, I don't have to do what you tell me to, meh. Like, for example, there's a household in particular that I can think of. In fact, this is somewhat of an epidemic. There's multiple occasions where if I go to a certain household setting, there once was a 6-year-old that walked up to me when I was a guest in the house when we were watching a UFC fight, and the kid yelled at me and he says, "You're sitting in my chair. Get up now." And I laughed. And I looked at the parents, and I was waiting for the parents to put the child in check. But the parents actually said, "Yeah, sorry, we have arranged seatings in this house, and that is where he sits. But you can go into the kitchen and pull out a kitchen chair and set it in the living room and watch the UFC fight." And I was flabbergasted, but I said, okay. And that's exactly what I did. Or you have children that actually will hit the mother when the mother tries to set some kind of a boundary in place where they say, no, you've had enough chocolate chip cookies. That's enough. You got to go to bed. And then the child's like, no, give me chocolate chip cookies now, and starts hitting the mom. And then the mom tries to play it off like it's cute or something. But you guys catch my drift. There is a will to power between the adults and the minors. And if there isn't a happy medium of allowing certain freedoms, but also, perhaps more importantly, setting certain barriers, then you're going to have a chaotic situation where the children are
basically going to rule the parents or rule the adults in the environment with an iron fist. And I wanted to bring this to your guys' attention as well, because, like I said, it is just as catastrophic, just in a very different way. Now, one of the main symptoms of juvenocracy is you have a child that's morbidly obese because the parents let them have free range access to the pantry and to the refrigerator, and they don't set limitations. And if they try to set limitations, the child is going to get angry and tell the parents to fuck off and throw themselves on the ground, throw a tantrum. And then the parents just think that their life's easier when they just let the kid do what they want. But really, when you do that, and all of the health problems and all of the bullying that's going to occur to them in the future because you allowed them to get morbidly obese, that's completely um, reprehensible on the parents' part. In fact, I would even argue that to let a child have access to unhealthy food without limitations is actually a form of child abuse, right? But another symptom of juvenocracy is when when the children are ordering the parents around, saying, you know, buy me this or do this for me, and they don't do anything in return, so they're out of exchange, right? And like I said, if you let this dynamic get out of control, you're going to be in a situation where the children are going to eventually physically abuse and even verbally abuse the parents. And it's going to happen oftentimes either in a public place or when there's guests over at the house, and the parents are going to try to play it off and act like it's just him being cute, or oh, he needs a nap. Oh, it's way past your bedtime, isn't it? Ha ha ha. But really, if you allow the child to get that out of control, in a way, you do kind of deserve it, unless, of course, the child has some kind of a uh, disability or what have you. But if we're talking just your everyday, normal, healthy child, when this juvenocracy gets to that point, it's because it hasn't been corrected and it hasn't been put in check for so long that the child is basically ruling the adults with an iron fist to the point where the parents actually become enslaved by the children. Now the children are the masters and the adults in the environment are the slave, right? This is just as catastrophic. And I would say that this is particularly bad um, amongst Generation Z and millennials in particular. I was raised by Gen X, so that type of thing I would never be able to get away with being disrespectful to adults. I do consider children to be subordinate beings. However, the question is it possible to let a ruler be a ruler and let a subject be a subject, so to speak, whereby the child, regardless, even though there are freedoms and barriers that are in place and a happy medium between the two, that the child, because of that, is going to be in a position where he is able to think for himself, act for himself, and be himself within reason, and have a large amount of sovereignty as long as what they're doing is not outright destructive while still being in that subordinate position. I would say yes, if you don't consider the child to be a subordinate, but you consider the child to be on equal footing with the parent, then that is a slippery slope, unfortunately, that's just going to lead to a juvenocracy. So I think the best thing to do is to create a situation where there is neither adultism at play or juvenocracy. That's all I'm saying. Because the abuse of flesh and the consumption of flesh is an archonic activity, we must extend our definition of an archon to those who work at slaughterhouses, which is nothing more
than animal abuse facilities where those who make their living working there do so by uh, traumatizing sentient life forms, by torturing them up until their death. They are an Archon because they have complete psychopathic and sadistic rulership over those life forms that are being um, terrorized. Basically, if you work at a slaughterhouse, as far as I'm concerned, you're a terrorist because you're a terrifier, first and foremost, and because you terrify and you cause terror, you're a terrorist. You see how that works? This is the meaning of what it is to be terrible. That which is terrible is that which causes terror. So, with that being said, we got to think of Yahweh. You have Christians that say that they're God fearing. You have in the Old Testament, it says, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. You have all of this fear of going to hell if you don't obey Yahweh. Yahweh says time and time again, fear me, for I am your God. What is the meaning of all of this fear that Yahweh is placing upon people? It is because Yahweh is terrible, because he causes terror. He's a metaphysical terrorist. But as above, so below, there's a kind of genealogical imprint from Yahweh within the very fiber of our DNA that makes us behave in a way that is not too dissimilar from him. It only makes sense because if Yahweh is the evil creator God and the human design is a part of his creation, then it would only make sense that, like father, like son, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. So when it says in the Old Testament that Yahweh is most pleased by the aroma of burnt flesh, are we not so too pleased by the aroma of burnt flesh when we are having a barbecue? Yahweh gets off on animal ritual sacrifices, and so do we. Because the only difference is Yahweh is consuming it energetically as an offering, but we're consuming it physically, but our behavior in that way is identical. This is why the old Gnostics, like the Manichaeans and various Gnostic sects, did not consume flesh because they felt that it was too demiurgic. And they're quite right. And what's more is that if you look at these slaughterhouses, what they really are is the mass dissemination of negative emotiveness, which is basically louche energy extraction that is being fed upon by the beast machine. You know, don't think for a second that the louche of a human is any different than the louche of an animal, because when we look at what louche is, it is nothing but the emoting or the outpouring of negative electricity from a life form. And this is being fed upon by the matrix demiurgic reality to empower it. That's its food source, right? So I think a lot of people make the mistake of saying that the matrix is merely feeding off of human suffering, but I think just as much, if not even more so, animal suffering. Because think about it, 85 billion animals get slaughtered in these horrible, inhumane conditions annually. Think of the prolongation of that pain and suffering and how much louche that is producing. You don't think that the demiurge is feeding on that too? Of course it is. And because we're talking 85 billion, that is a lot more loosh than the human kingdom is able to produce within any given day. So you see where I'm going with this is that if you work at a slaughterhouse, you are an Archon because you're basically the prison guard of a loosh harvesting facility. And I'm not necessarily saying that if you consume meat that makes you an Archon. However, I will say that consuming meat is an Archonic activity for sure. I don't believe that plant matter is capable of producing loosh on account of its semi-insentience. The definition of sentience is that which is capable of feeling emotions and or physical sensations. And a plant, to my knowledge, is capable of experiencing neither. It can't experience pain because it doesn't have a central nervous system or nerve endings, and it doesn't produce emotions because we don't say that a carrot is in a good mood or a bad mood. We don't say that a carrot is angry or depressed. Uh, to be frank, a carrot is just a fucking carrot. Now, that's not to say that there isn't some kind of a negativity that it as a life form that wants to survive is experiencing on account of being consumed when we know that plants don't want to be consumed. Many of them because they produce what's referred to as anti-nutrients, which is basically certain propellants to keep predators away because they don't want to be eaten. They do want to survive, they want to live. But if you want to compare whatever type of negativity that's being produced from a carrot, I'm not saying that there's no negativity that's being produced on account of eating it, but I'm saying that whatever it is, you can't compare it to loosh because loosh is a emotional outpouring of pure negativity. They do not feel emotions. They do not feel physical sensations. Whatever they're feeling that we don't quite understand is negligible in comparison to what a land animal would experience. I mean, if we take Aleister Crowley's advice in creating a salt circle and sacrificing an animal within that salt circle, evidently a surge of energy from the animal is going to course through our being, and we're going to be enlivened thereby, and it's going to assist us in our black magic ritual conduction. Now, you want to compare that level of loosh or life force energy that's being expelled from the organism to the fucking carrot, it's negligible in comparison. Therefore, I conclude that plant matter, although it doesn't want to die, is not producing loosh. It is a stimulus response automaton that mainly reacts chemically to stimuli in the environment. So I do conclude that plants want to live and they don't want to die, and it is messed up that we live in a world where we have to consume other life forms in order for us to stay alive. I don't think that they are producing loosh. And if they are producing something negative, it's negligible in comparison to what a pig, a cow, or a chicken, or a dog produces. If you kick a dog as hard as you can right in the ass, it's going to yelp, it's going to cower, it's going to be in fear. But if you slice up an onion, is it cowering in fear? Is it terrified? How can it be? It doesn't produce emotions. It doesn't have pain receptors. So I understand the argument of like, well, if we're not consuming animals, then we're still consuming plants and they're still a life form, so we're still consuming something, so why does it matter? But comparing a pumpkin in a pumpkin patch and making a jack-o'-lantern out of it versus skinning a cat alive with a knife, they're just not good comparisons in severity. That's what I mean by loosh. Plant matter isn't producing loosh, but land animals are. That's my point. All central nervous systems are created equal. Therefore, the pain that a dog experiences is identical to the pain that a human experiences. The only difference is animals cannot talk. Therefore, they cannot verbalize how it is that they are feeling and the pain that they are experiencing, so we make it justifiable. But the moment an animal could form language, which they shouldn't have to do because the pain that they undergo should absolutely speak for itself, but the moment they were able to talk, hypothetically, would be the moment we wouldn't be allowed to kill them anymore because they would be humanized as a result. All of a sudden, if the animals in the slaughterhouses were like, "Bro, what the fuck is wrong with you? You got me in this cage where I can't even move. I'm in so much pain. I'm in so much agony. What's up with that, man?" Then all of a sudden you'd be like, "Oh my God," and you would have the same amount of empathy for it as you would a human. But the only reason why we justify doing what we do to animals is because they can't talk. And it makes it so we feel that we can get away with treating them in cruel ways because they have no means of defending themselves by way of advocating for themselves. But really, they do advocate for themselves if you think about it, because when they squeal or they moan in distress, that is a valid form of communication. That is them giving protest to what is being done to them. That is them communicating, "Hey, this hurts a lot. I want it to stop. I do not consent." So they're talking to you, they're just doing so in their own way. Now, with that being said, as a thought experiment, imagine you had the ability to take your consciousness and place it temporarily within an animal at a slaughterhouse, and now your consciousness is overlaid on top of its consciousness. So, by contact, everything that that consciousness of the animal feels, you are going to feel it in exactly the same way that it's feeling it. I swear to God, you would not be able to last a minute, not even 30 seconds, because immediately you would want to press the eject button because you would be feeling extreme claustrophobia, extreme emotional distress, extreme physical pain, and you would panic and you would say, "What the fuck is this? Get me out of here now." But I promise you, once you press the eject button and you go back into your own body, you are going to walk away with a different point of view. What is of paramount importance is to cognize that we live in a world that is profoundly evil, and provably so, most of all due to the fact that animals eat other animals. You have the big bug that eats a small bug, but that same small bug will eat still an even smaller bug until the big bug, who eats all of the bugs that are smaller than it, gets scarfed by a fucking bird, and then the bird will get scarfed by a cat, and the dog will eat the cat, and the Chinaman will eat the dog, and so on and so forth. And I just find it uh, appalling that we live in a world where the vast majority of humanity considers it not only to be normal, but even necessary. Most people are fascinated by it. They'll sit down and watch Animal Planet and they'll look at a fucking gazelle being eaten alive slowly from the crotch upward where it's screaming in pain and it'll take it like fucking 15 or 20 minutes or more for it to actually be dead. And it's like, not only do animals eat other animals, but they get consumed in such a way that is just prolonged agony. Sometimes don't even have the decency just to go straight for the throat. And I just find this kind of a tooth and claw, flesh consuming flesh to be just something that I have a extreme aversion to about this reality. Something like that could only exist in a designed realm that is absolutely deranged, despicable, and really a fright to be alive. I am frightened that even though I'm not getting consumed by an animal, or maybe even not even consuming animals, that we live in a world where everything dietarily is just consuming everything else. Life feeds upon life, and I am forever disgusted with this fact, and I have nothing but hatred for the fact that such a realm was designed to exist as such when it could have either not existed at all or could have been designed in such a way where the life forms could either not consume food in the first place and just live off of photosynthesis, or have edible landscapes as far as the eye could see, and we could just fucking pluck an endless amount of edible plants that are not distressed by being consumed. But because we don't live in a world that's like that, that's the main reason why I have pure spiritual hatred for the fact that a place like this exists. You know, people might say, yeah, but animals eat other animals, bro. And I'm saying, yeah, animals do eat other animals, and that's the fucking problem. I resent the fact that I exist in a world where that is the case. I am resentful of the fact that I live in a world that endlessly self cannibalizes itself. You have animality proper feasting upon the flesh of its own animality, and it's fucking despicable, and I hate it.
I also believe that while the animal is alive, because it is producing extreme amount of loosh energetically, not to mention all of the adrenaline and various stress hormones while the animal is alive, I believe that when it dies, there is all of that loosh residue imprinted within the meat itself, not to mention the biochemical secretions of being distressed. And I think that that is where we get our quote vitality from deriving our substance from such a post death product. Because when I was a vegan from 2020 to 2023, my body at some point for about a year was constantly craving meat. And one day I couldn't take it anymore and I ate some ground beef. And as a result of that, I shit you not, I felt this life force energy just coursing through my entire body. And without exaggeration, for the first month that I started eating meat again, it was like a drug to me. It was like some kind of a elixir. And I don't think that it was the protein or the fat from the animal product that I was deprived of or that I was craving. I think what it was is I think that it's actually the loosh residue that is imprinted within the meat that causes us, especially if you go a long time without eating meat and you start eating it again, that course of uh, energy That's that strong current just going through your body. And I'm not the only one that has experienced this. There have been dozens of people that I talk to who are ex-vegans who said that when they started eating meat again, they felt like it was a drug, where there was just a surge of energy that was coursing through their body. But they conclude that it was because their body was requiring the protein, the fat, etc. within the animal product. But I actually put some thought into it, and I have concluded, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm 100% correct, but I theorize that what we are actually deriving from eating meat is loosh residue, and also all of the stress hormones that the animal was producing, particularly upon being slaughtered, because you have to imagine that they're terrified. All of that adrenaline is being infused in the meat. So I think it's a combination of small amounts of adrenaline residue and energetic loosh residue. So if you think about it, by definition, eating meat is a kind of adrenochrome. It's a kind of archonic loosh vampiricism. So I conclude this from my own anecdotal experiences of eating meat and then foregoing eating meat for X amount of time and then eating meat again and feeling whatever kind of overwhelming energetic sensation that really enlivened me. But that feeling of, quote, being enlivened, I think, is the life force of another being. And the reason why most people don't realize that is because most people eat animal products their whole life and they don't know what it's like to go X amount of time with being without it and then consuming it again. The same happened to my father. He was a vegetarian. He said his body was craving it. And once he did so after being a vegetarian for several years, he felt the same thing. So I'm thinking that it's not so much the protein or the nutrients from said post-death subsistence, but I think that feeling of the energetic current is loosh residue. Now, in the same way a disembodied Archon is attracted to loosh high traffic areas, such as slaughterhouses and insane asylums, hospitals, prisons, etc., they are attracted to various people within these areas that are a food source to them, that are emitting a lot of stressful emotiveness into them that they are therefore leeching off of directly from the energetic source. Because you got to keep in mind that they are negative energy itself, but it's personified as a kind of intelligence that goes to the most negative kinds of energy, and that's what it feeds off of. But it's not for itself, it's actually to empower the matrix system like a battery and feed the demiurge, so to speak. This whole reality entity in its totality is only able to function by way of this battery, and that's what these archonic monsters do. They go to these loosh high traffic areas, and whereupon they come in contact with distressful emotivenesses, they siphon it, and there's like a giant hose when it's being siphoned that's going straight to a battery that's actually empowering the Matrix and feeding the Demiurge along with themselves. I believe this to be true. However, I'm not saying that the human being with his theory of mind or with his or her sense of self is archonic. I think that our biology is archonic because we are engaging in the same activity, biologically speaking, that the Archons are doing in the astral realm. The only difference is the Archons are going straight to the energetic source, while we are still feeding upon Lush just like an Archon, biologically speaking, but we're doing so by way of residue. So we're getting it in a much smaller amount, but because this energy is so potent, we're still able to feel the effects thereof, even if it is in um, minuscule amounts that are administered intermittently. So that's mainly the difference, is that the Archons that are disembodied, they're getting it straight from the tap, so to speak. But we are getting it by way of residue. But throughout the day, depending on how much meat we eat, this adds up and it can actually be quite a lot. And even if it is small amounts, this loosh residue, loosh is a, loosh is a very potent thing. It is quite literally the power source of the matrix. It's sort of the energy that keeps the light bulb running, so to speak. And I think that it's doing the same thing to our biology in the same way the reality entity as a totality is feeding upon this. I think our biologies are also feeding upon this. And I think that there's something rather evil that causes the ex-vegan or ex-vegetarian to go back to eating meat again. And what's demonic about it is I think that the body is craving this loosh. And that's why we often go back to it. Because it's because the body itself is archonic. As soon as that meat with the loosh residue is digested and it starts going into your bloodstream, your biology is honing in on the loosh that is present within your bloodstream and it is deriving power from it. And a rebuttal might be put forward against my thought processes, and it would go something like this. What about the ruminant animal who lived a long and happy life, free range, grazing grass in a meadow somewhere, and when it was killed, it was done so by way of gunshot wound to the back of the ear, didn't even see it coming. Therefore, because the animal lived a happy and long life, and upon death there was no stress because it all happened instantaneously and it didn't see it coming, therefore there should be no loosh or adrenochrome present within the meat. Well, theoretically, this is true, but you have to also keep in mind that it's not just the loosh or the adrenaline. What is also vampiric, and archonically so, is the fact that you are taking the life force energy that is present within the meat. Even though the meat is dead, it does not mean that the life force energy is not still present by way of residue as well. You might call it prana or just life force energy, whatever. That is also present, and that is also a archonic activity. So you have to also keep that in mind. Is it, quote, the lesser of two evils? Definitely. But I would not define that as non-archonic because just because the heart stopped doesn't mean that the life force from the blood that was pumping through the whole body is not still present. It is still there. The life force energy is still there. And unfortunately, even if you are a vegan, you are not exempt from the death toll of billions of animals as well. Vegans often say, my lifestyle is morally superior because no animals had to die. But that's actually not true, particularly because of the grain industry. which the machine that's used to pick up the wheat, it's essentially a death machine that goes in with blades and decapitates and beheads small animals in the billions. However, I would make the argument that it is a lesser of two evils by far, because at least the animal was in a state of nature without human interference, and at least the death was most likely instantaneous. Now, if you want to compare that to what humans do as far as animal experimentation for, quote, scientific advancement on lab rats and monkeys, I mean, that is just producing a lot of loosh for towards those creatures, because they deliberately give it cancer. They'll cut out its eyeballs and they'll cut out pieces of its brain to see if it can still do certain procedures. It will deliberately poison them and make them sick and then resuscitate them and do it again. It's absolutely horrible. And considering that monkeys are so similar to humans, in fact, they're considered in the scientific world, quote, primates, so they're kind of, in a way, proto-human, and we're still able to do all of the fucked up shit to a life form that intelligent, and the prolongation thereof. I mean, if you want to compare the amount of loosh that that is producing versus uh, a rabbit that got its head cut off by way of one of these wheat gatherer machines, I think that the comparison for loosh, if you want to compare one to the other, is very crystal clear to me that there is a lesser of two evils. But I want to bring this up because it's a mistake for a vegan to think that no animals had to die because of my dietary lifestyle choices. Okay. It is also something interesting to bring up that human beings are the most evil because we are the only species that uh, experiments on other creatures, and we are the only species that will enslave other creatures for our benefit and put them in torturous confinement that will actually go on for years upon years at their detriment. We're the only species that does that. Now, there is a dietary oddity within a vast minority of the human family called fruitarianism, and the argument here is that this is the diet where truly there is the least harm possible for two main reasons. Reason number one is that if an apple falls from the tree and you pick up the apple and eat it, you are eating something that is the extension of a plant, but not the plant itself. You're eating edible byproducts of a plant without harming the plant itself. Same with like blueberries or plucking an avocado from an avocado tree, plucking a coconut from a coconut tree. These are basically offerings of the plant without killing the plant itself by cutting down the tree or the bush, as opposed to something like carrots and potatoes, where in order to consume it, you're actually killing the entire plant itself. So they make the argument that this is the least harm possible. Also, insofar as when it comes to those industries within veganism that use those death machines to kill billions of animals, they say, well, if we really want to be animal death free with our diet, then you have to go to pretty extreme measures where you're really limiting your diet to just the bare minimum of fruit. And that is interesting thought experiment, but I think there is some truth to that. That it is the dietary choice where there truly is the least harm possible. But then again, how are you going to convince humanity to eat nothing but fruit? Uh, it sounds expensive and it sounds extremely restrictive. I experimented with fruitarianism at one point in time, and of course I ended up returning to my whore ways shortly after, which I'm not proud of. But there's a lot of people who do this lifestyle, and they say that they feel amazing and they just have an abundance of energy all the time because this is the natural human diet. But then there's others who appear to be malnourished and sickly, and they end up quitting the diet and going back to animal products because they say that they felt shitty on that diet. So, whatever your perspective is, that is just an interesting thing to keep in mind, is that particular diet.
If the Demiurge is the commander-in-chief of the Archons, then, as an extension of that, Archons are so Archons to the extreme in which they serve the Demiurge and or worship the Demiurge by conforming to the laws of its dictates, by promoting the laws of its dictates, and or enforcing the laws of its dictates. And who fits the bill more so than the Abrahamic religiosity with their dogmatism the world over? They worship the demiurge and they serve the demiurge. Therefore, I conclude that religious people are, if not archons themselves, then certainly are influenced or possessed by that which is archonic. How can we conclude otherwise? The philosophical psychopathy, authored by none other than the demiurge itself. If you subscribe to such a philosophical psychopathy, authored by the demiurge itself, then that makes you a extension of the demiurge in a roundabout way, but having a subordinate role, and we call them archons, or that which is influenced or perfectly possessed by the archonic. I would define an archon in this context as any entity or person that is either in agreement with Yahweh and or working directly to serve him as a devotee. You could say that God himself is a personality disorder. So, if there is a malignant psychological profile, and you are revering that malignant psychological profile, then you're going to adopt it for yourself. Because they say that the worshipper becomes like unto that which is worshipped. And that is true. To give affinity unto the abominable makes you just as abominable as the awful thing in which you are giving affinity to. There is a psychosocial phenomenon that I refer to as assholes osmosis, which manifest in a couple different ways. One, if you're around an asshole long enough without escaping therefrom, then you are going to become more and more like that asshole. And number two, if there is a asshole that you admire, then you are going to become more and more like that asshole as your admiration grows for it. But case in point, you see this a lot with Yahweh worshippers because Yahweh is the biggest fucking asshole that the cosmos has ever seen. We know this. But if you are subjugated to that toxic personality long enough, or you give affinity to that toxic personality long enough, the combination of those two, or one or the other, the asshole's osmosis is going to rub off on you, and you are going to start behaving just like Yahweh. Some call it Islam, some call it Judaism, some call it Christianity. I call it Yahweh diabolism. That's the one true religion. And Yahweh diabolism can be defined as those who worship a devil called Yahweh. All Archons are the underlink to their overlord, the Demiurge. Enough said. Now let's move on to another topic when it comes to these Archons of the flesh that I have failed to mention thus far. And this one happens to be the most notorious, and that is psychopaths and people who are sadistic. You can't have one without the other. If you're psychopathic, you are sadistic, and if you are sadistic, you are psychopathic. This is the toxic human personality that brings himself up by putting others down, or by deriving pleasure by putting somebody else through pain. Somebody who fills their energetic cup by depleting you of your own energy reserve. This could be, and they often do occupy positions of authority. This could be your boss, or it can even be your coworker, your spouse, your parents, a roommate. It doesn't really matter. The point is, they all have one thing in common, and that is they are psychopathic and they are sadistic. They therefore are energy vampires that extract loosh from others as a food source to enliven themselves by making you feel as though the longer you're around them, the more and more you are dead inside. We all know this type of person who is in the best mood possible and energetic at all times by being extrovertedly toxic to others. The subhuman rottenness of the archonic personality type is so overrepresented in positions of authority due to what I refer to as the law of psychopathic superimposition, which works algorithmically to put the most antisocial personality types in positions of authority at the expense of the prosocial personality type. And even though psychopaths are a minority in the human population, they are far overrepresented in positions of authority because this ensures the maximum amount of loosh production per day so the matrix can get its quota of an ideal amount. Now, if we lived in a world where nice people who had chill personalities were in these workplace environments as an authority figure, this obviously would not be producing enough loosh, if any at all. That's why you have to reverse that dynamic and make it so the most terrible type of human being is going to be occupying these positions due to the fact that humanity spends so much of their life at their 9 to 5 slave job. It only makes sense that you use that as an opportunity for loosh extraction. And the same is also true for those who are stuck in domestic situations where they are living in subjugation to such a type of person. The same dynamic is taking place. So you ask yourself, why is it that employment at employment opportunity after employment opportunity after employment opportunity, I find myself in positions where I am being subjugated by a fucking psychopath? or a malignant narcissist. When we're told that these are supposed to be a minority of the human population, but yet I tend to only encounter them when I am in these situations, whether it's professionally or domestically. Why do I keep attracting this type of person to me as a partner? Why do I keep finding myself in jobs where I have to deal with this type of person? I've answered your question. It's because of the law of psychopathic superimposition, which works algorithmically to put the antisocial personality type in positions of power at the expense of the prosocial personality type to produce the maximum amount of loosh possible. Regardless of them being a minority of the human population, they're going to be overrepresented in these positions to serve that exact purpose because they are archons in the flesh. Manly P. Hall, who was a 33rd degree Freemason, wrote in his most famous book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, that the demiurge is no other than a personification of the planet Saturn. So, with that being said, we have to understand that, according to Manly P. Hall, Saturn and the demiurge belong to the same essence. We also need to understand that most people misunderstand the true meaning of as above, so below. It's much deeper and occult than people realize. Because what that actually means is that that which is happening in the celestial sphere is directly affecting the terrestrial sphere. They are basically mirrors of each other. So when we think about the as above or the astrological activity that's taking place, we need to isolate the Saturnian principle. What are the Saturnian things, which is the as above, that is corresponding to the so below? Well, we can find that out by looking into the rulership book written by Rex E. Bills well over 100 years ago, whereby through an astrological dictionary, he gives you a list of every material object that is ruled by Saturn. So, in the same way, they say as above, so below, there's also as below, so above. So, with that in mind, all of these objects that are extensions or ruled by the Saturnian principle are basically the demiurge manifesting itself here on Earth as far as objectivity is concerned. So let's look into these various things that belong to the Saturnian principle. Government buildings, as well as all government personnel. It says it right here. It also, and of course that means it rules politicians, police officers, prisons, etc. And it also says here that it rules bosses. It rules labor in general. So it not only rules your boss at work, but it also rules the fact of the nine to five slave job itself. Okay? It says here it rules slaughterhouses and slaughterhouse workers and the animals that are held in the slaughterhouses. Okay? It says here that it rules falsehood. It rules enslavement. It rules the Democratic Party. And it also, for whatever reason, rules donkeys, which makes perfect sense because the earliest Israelites actually worshipped Yahweh in the form of a donkey. And the Democratic Party, its symbol is
ruled by a donkey. So it says here that it rules the Democratic Party, and it also rules donkeys. Do you think that's a coincidence? No fucking way. Um, so this basically proves everything that I've been saying in this video up until this point. It rules authority invested in man, i.e., the rulers, the Archons, which include um, all government buildings. Public school systems are government buildings, right? And the teachers are authority invested in man by way of governmentality. So that would also apply to them. So this rulership book actually proves with demonstrable evidence from an occult perspective everything that I've been telling you up until this point in this video. So many people out there say, I hate the Archons, I hate the Demiurge. But yet, they don't understand that the Demiurge is merely a manifestation of the Saturnian principle. And as above, so below, these objects and personnel that I mentioned that are correspondence in objectivity, whereby the celestial is the as above and the terrestrial is the so below, and they mirror each other. And because the Saturnian principle would be no good without an object that corresponds to it, you could quite literally say that when you are looking at a politician, when you are looking at a police officer, when you are looking at a slaughterhouse or a slaughterhouse worker, or the animals being victimized in slaughterhouses, public school system, all of these things, the Democratic Party, donkeys, these are objectifications of Saturn. So, quite literally, when you observe these things that physically exist that correspond to Saturn, you are looking at Saturn itself. As below, so above. As above, so below. That police officer, that politician, the elites that control the world, all this governmentality, all this authority invested in man, it's just an extension of the Saturnian principle. What good would the Saturnian principle be, or the demiurgic archonic principle be, without objectivity that can correspond with its essence? Hence, all of the fucking atoms that comprise these objects are not only Saturnian, but if you think about it, Saturn itself. It's kind of weird to think. Are you telling me that politicians, police officers, all this archonic matrix bullshit is quite literally an objectification of Saturn itself? Yes, that's what I'm saying. It's not necessarily that they're ruled by Saturn. If you think about it even deeply, they are Saturn. Think about it, man. So too are mosques, synagogues, and churches ruled by the Saturnian principle, because what are these worshippers doing other than actively worshiping the demiurge, Saturn, right? Not only that, but there is a certain race of people that starts with the letter J, ends with a W, it's a three-letter word, and it is said in this rulership book that they are the race of people that are ruled by the planet Saturn. Really? So, you mean to fucking tell me that all of the positions that are correspondent of the Saturnian principle, the Saturnian race is the one who occupies those positions? Is your mind not fucking blown? Are you not convinced that this is some kind of a evil simulation that is running a script? Are you not convinced? Could it, in any, could that be a coincidence in by any stretch of the imagination that government is the Saturnian principle par excellence, but the Saturnian race occupies those Saturnian positions? That all of these Saturnian positions are ruled by the race of people that is ruled by Saturn. Unfucking believable. But you can't make this shit up. In fact, I think that when this J E you know what, I think it's a 3-letter word, and the last word that I failed to mention was a W. These people, right? It makes me think that when they're worshiping their Saturnian god, they're basically, in a roundabout way, worshiping themselves. Because you have the as above Saturnian principle as an essence, but you have the so below correspondent, which is the objectification thereof. So, in a roundabout way, they are quite literally worshiping themselves. And not only that, but they were the first to worship Yahweh. So when all of these Islamists and Christians are worshiping Yahweh, they're basically worshiping the very God of the Saturnian race. You see how this works? You have all of these billions of people that are worshiping the Saturnian race's god, which is Saturn itself. And you wonder why we live in a hellscape. Of course we live in a hellscape. The majority of the inhabitants of this earth are actively worshiping Saturn. And because we're giving Yahweh all of our power by worshiping it, we're assuring that the will of Saturn continues to be fulfilled, and it gets fulfilled by way of putting the particular Saturnian race in those Saturnian positions. The more we worship Yahweh, the more we empower Yahweh. But the more we empower Yahweh, the more we empower the J word, because they're extensions of each other. Don't you get it? So you wonder why? Why are they ruling over us? Why are they doing all the terrible things that they're doing? It's because you're fucking worshiping the God, which is an extension of them. You're empowering the J word by worshiping Yahweh because they're extensions of each other. Don't you get it, man? Government is the control center of the Archons. Humanity becomes the plaything thereby, where enslavement masquerades as order. It's governed by the inversion principle, which can be defined as incongruencies of operational definitions, where government destroys freedom, universities destroy knowledge, the media destroys information, doctors destroy health, etc., etc. For example, the reason why we go to work is to have money, but yet we go to work and we end up not having any money. That is a incongruency of purposeful operations. When you live in a reality where everything is in the reverse of truth, and when the Matrix gives you a claim that this is the purpose of said institution, it's actually the antithesis. That's its purpose. This is the reason why doctors don't help you become healthy, but rather they profit off of your sickness and they make you sick. This is why um, the most toxic forms of spirituality is actually found in religion, because religion claims to be spiritual, but it's actually anti-spirit. So when you have a institution that says it's pro blank, it's actually anti blank. That is the inversion principle. It's all based in incongruency. And when you become aware of ubiquitous incongruencies by understanding the inversion principle, this has certain symptoms. It starts with denial. You don't want to believe it to be true. But once you realize it is, you become confused. And then, once that goes away, you become angry. And then eventually, once that wears off, you become chronically depressed. And when that wears off, you become indifferent. I fluctuate between anger, depression, and indifference myself. That is what the inversion principle does to you once you see it present in all things in this reality. Some people call it Earth. That is a lie. I call it retrograde reality. I call it that which is said to be good is actually bad. That which is said to be true is actually false, etc., etc. So, truth, in essence, is the recognition of the inversion principle. So, all you can do from that moment forward is take the propositions that are being presented to you and antithesize them and say, no, you're saying that government is freedom or order, but I say it's enslavement. I say it's chaos. You tell me that this is the truth. I reject it. I declare falsehood. And that's really all you could do. You have to invert the inversion. Because if you realize that everything that's being presented is a inversion of its claim, then you take that inversion and you invert it, and then you have the closest thing to truth that this reality is able to provide. So at this point, you may ask yourself, if the overall definition of an Archon is being an agent of the Matrix, does this not mean that most people are so, considering they do just that? And the answer is mostly no. A lot of people may be agents of the Matrix, insofar as promoting such ideation and activities, but yet they do not have the title of Archon because they lack the positional professionhood to be considered a ruler. So if somebody is actively believing Matrix lies and promoting Matrix lies, this just makes them an idiot. However, if they are forcing it on their own children or upholding the Matrix system by way of a career, then that's what makes them Archons. Authority in Matrixness is required. Without these qualifications, they are mere agents of the Matrix without being in a position of power to qualify them as Archon. But make no mistake, they share the same disposition as an Archon, and they would become so in a heartbeat if the opportunity presented itself. Archon overall definition: an agent of the Matrix with the qualification of being an authority figure that allows them to enforce it. This is found in 5 main types. 1. Archonic employment, which is exclusive to governmental rulership. The highest rank would be the deep state, and then puppet politicians, and so on down the line with police officers, tax collectors, teachers, doctors, psychiatrists, etc. Then you have archonic parentalship, i.e., parents who act as agents of the Matrix by brainwashing their children to the ways of the Matrix and forcing them to conform thereto. with complete rulership over them. 3. Archonic slaughterhouse workers. Agents of the Matrix who traumatize by torturing quadrupeds onto death. Such a fearful animality is prolonged to produce as much excruciation extraction as possible from the suffering energy that is being emitted, so a metaphysical predator can consume it. Animal abuse by profession. Slaughterhouse workers make possible the surplus of surcharge the Gnostics call louche, so the aerial parasites can live at the expense of that which is actively being agonized. The slaughterhouse is nature made self-aware of its cruelty. Killing floor of the false god, harvesting suffering energy. 4. Energy vampires who act as psychopaths to perform sadistic actions to produce louche so that they may feed off of it themselves and feed the matrix system as well. 5. Yahweh worshippers who uphold demiurgic religiosity by believing, promoting, or enforcing it.